I'm very excited to introduce our first guest this morning. Sandeep Murthy is the managing partner at Lightbox. It's a company that he's built ground up, raised over 400 million over 3 funds, and he's also a very dear friend. He's someone I've known for the last 15 odd years and interviewed many, many times. He's extremely articulate, extremely precise with his vision. A lot of pressure there now on those 60 slides. But you know, just to give you a sense of what Lightbox does, while of course they've invested in some of these mega companies from Rebel Foods to Omaha, they spend a lot of time with the young companies that they nurture. And Sandeep's office, which is amazing by the way, and we've had a few sessions there as well for LWL, they always have an open door for a curious mind and a startup founder that wants to come in and chat to them and brainstorm and discuss ideas. Even when I've gone in and spoken to him once or twice about the most random things, he never makes you feel that, you know, something is not important, and he's always had time for a coffee and at least an hour, hour and a half to discuss whatever it is. So with that, let me welcome Sandeep Murthy here on stage. A big round of applause for taking out the time this Saturday morning.
Is this on? Yeah. All right. Wow, that's quite a lot of pressure. So first off, thank you. I don't think I get a chance nowadays to talk a lot about what we're doing just because we're very busy doing what we're doing. And when Abba asked, I said it was a fantastic opportunity for us to actually sit back and reflect on what it is we've been doing and this question of scale. I think the question of scale was really interesting because I probably have a lot more mistakes to share than answers. So I think, but before I get into all of that, I thought what I'd do is first set a little bit of context on who we are, the kinds of companies we've invested in, some of our thoughts on the market and what we see kind of happening in India in general, because I think that influences at least my perspective on how we think about scale and I guess some of the problems we face in it. So to start off with, basically, we work with a few companies, and it's interesting, we used to have a very complicated statement for this, and last night, again, I realized complicated doesn't work. So we work with a few companies that use technology to help people consume better. And that's pretty much it. We can talk about investing, we can talk about brands, we can talk about tech-enabled, but essentially what we're trying to do is just help a handful of people actually do what they do better using technology in different ways. And these are the companies we've done it with. And I've been doing it now for almost 20 years, and I think in this journey, I've had the chance to see, starting with pure tech companies that were in a world before the internet really evolved, and we had to really figure out, actually even before mobile phones really evolved, and we had to figure out how we're gonna reach customers. I'll give you a quick story. ClearTrip, when we started, the first ad we ran, and we were under a lot of pressure to kind of launch and do it, so we put this big ad in the newspaper, and we were very excited. People were gonna come to the website. The first ticket we sold was a gentleman who found our office, came, rang the doorbell, and said, "Can I buy a ticket?" And so we realized we failed miserably. And so, but that was the backdrop of when we started with this. To today, as we're looking at businesses that are entirely mobile enabled, like Rooter, which is focused on game streaming. So this is people watching people play video games, which I find insane. But my kids on the flip side will tell me, you watch people play basketball, so you know, why not? And so there we have 1 million daily active users actually watching people play. So, I mean, that's the kind of spectrum of businesses we've seen. And I'll talk about them in some detail as we go. But I thought I'd start just with 2, because I think of late, I've been very focused on sort of impact and the environmental impact and the social impact that the next billion people consuming is gonna have. And I think that that was born in the last 5-6 years, I think, when we saw the whole Greta Thunberg stuff, and you start to sit back and realize that every year the city floods and every year something happens, and if we're driving consumption of the next billion people, we need to do it more mindfully and more thoughtfully. And actually, these were some data points that came out. 60% of the world's agricultural land is used for beef, although it accounts for less than 2% of the calories consumed. And it takes 8 barrels of oil to produce 1 cow. So I have nothing against eating beef, I'm just saying in general, there's gotta be a different thought process around that. Modern agriculture wastes topsoil at the rate of 1 inch a year. It takes 1,000 years to produce that 1 inch of topsoil. There's a view that says we'll be out of land to produce agriculture in the next 60 years. So these are problems. And if you take it in India, it's even more exacerbated because it's actually very solvable. This is produce from or let's say grains or fruits or vegetables from a farmer to the end customer. It goes through 7 steps. In that 7-step process, about 32% of it gets wasted. Now, interestingly, in developed countries like the US, that 32% wastage takes place at the customer end. So they have a different problem. But this problem seems much more solvable. If you can just improve the supply chain, you can do better there. And so we found a company in that area called Waycool that's doing that. And that kind of drove us into this thought process of if we can improve the supply chain, we can then build the food brands that will be more interesting and cost effective for the consumers going forward. By the way, I've got 60 slides, so I'll just keep talking. If you have thoughts or you want to stop or anything, please do so, because otherwise this will go on. On the other side, we looked at the cities. I mean, again, I assume everyone lives here. In Bombay, it took 21 years to hit the first million cars. It took 12 years to hit the next million, and in 6 years we hit the third million. So at this rate, we're clearly running out of road space. 70% of traffic is made up by cars, but it only moves about 10% of the population. And so, and again, enough people have been on either side of the coastal road debate, and I'm sure this came up in different ways. And so the question is, how do we address this? How do we ensure that as we're thinking about city planning, we're looking at things differently? And I found this really interesting. That's how much space on the road it takes to move that many people by bus, that many people by bike, and that many people by car. It's the same number of people. And so if you just look at that and you say, if you can move people by bus, it turns out to be a much more efficient system. And so that's how we got into a business called CityFlow. And so we looked at it and said, if we can create a more comfortable ride, the average commute, I think, is close to a little over an hour, which is like an airline flight, right? And so you look at that and you say, airline flights are quite nice, bus journeys are quite terrible. So if I can make the bus journey better, make it more frequent, make it closer to your house, and ensure that, and actually Bombay is really interesting because it's organized into about 40 residential hubs and 15 business hubs. So you can fill a bus up in 3 stops and empty it in 3 stops. So you don't have to do this stop. So you can be as efficient as a car and move people from place to place. And so that was an interesting idea that we got into. So in general, during the days, you'll probably see a lot of these buses. I think we now have about 300 buses in Bombay. So that was just a bit of a glimpse into some of the companies we've invested in. I thought I'd take a few minutes now and just talk about our view of the market, because I think before we talk about scaling, like I said, it's important to put some context around at least our lens on the market, because that informs a lot of how we've looked at things. So I think everyone's kind of heard this and understood this. We're going to be a $10 trillion economy soon. It's been an interesting journey throughout this, and I think over the last 20 years, my experience is we have underwhelmed in terms of development at the pace that is reflective of this, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. These are our miracle years. Many countries have gone through it, and I think that if you look at it, Japan had a period between the 70s and the 80s where they grew tremendously. South Korea did the same. China did the same. We are now going to go through this next decade of our miracle years. And if you look at that, the pace at which it's happening, it took us 7 years. Actually, let's look at it this way. It took us 14 years to add about 2 trillion. It took us 2 years to add the next trillion. And within the next 10 years, we'll add another 6 trillion. So that's a pretty good rate of growth, and that's a big sense of change that's going to take place. Our public markets are doing irrational things, in my opinion, but they are doing really well compared to the world, and that makes my job as a venture investor much more difficult. Because, just to put it in context, if I'm investing in a private company, my pitch to somebody is, I can give you better returns than the public market, because the public market is slow. Not the case. So it makes our job much harder, and we're illiquid as an asset. India accounted for 46% of all real-time digital transactions globally. That's really cool. I mean, the fact that we've been able to build a tech stack and the government has been a driver of that has put us in a really strong position in terms of understanding data. 2/3 of all Goldman Sachs employees are in India, and it continues to grow there. Google's second largest campus after their headquarters is actually going to be in Hyderabad. 99% of all mobile phones are now made in India, that are consumed in India are made in India. This is the other amazing thing. While a lot of the infrastructure outside is a mess, some of the things that are happening in certain areas are amazing. So I don't know if you've been to this airport, but it's phenomenal. This I didn't realize. The number of airports that we've actually built in the country has gone from 74 to 148. That road, and we've talked about road kilometers that have been built, but actually the quality of them And again, the coastal road, you can have your views on it, but nonetheless, I think it is something that is improving infrastructure. Now coming to kind of consumption. Essentially, our triangle is becoming a diamond. The middle class is growing, the middle income is growing. We can debate at what rate, we can debate at what level, but generally this is the trend we're moving in. This is the Apple Store when it opened in BKC at Geo. That was Tim Cook. And if you look at this, this is discretionary versus non-discretionary consumption. And so clearly we're moving from an economy of needs to wants. And I think that that's, the opportunity exists in that to now start to create the brands that people will actually want to consume. And that's exactly what's happening. I mean, if you look across this, it's amazing how many brands are growing, how many of them are funded, and it's clear to me that not all of them are going to survive. But that's fine. I think you have to go through this journey and you have to figure out how to make something out of these. And we saw similar trends in other markets, which is why I guess it's heartening to believe that we're in a flow that should actually come to a logical conclusion at the end. So these brands all came about at a time when those economies started to really evolve and develop in a certain way. Now, when we think about brands though, we kind of have to look at them in two different ways. We've looked at utility brands and discretionary brands. And so when you look at these utility brands, and we took a bag of rice.
Can I ask you to do one thing before you go to this section? I was just saying that I can ask you to do something before you get to this section. All the stats that we see around India and the growth, as people who are either working in the middle of their careers at a company today in 2024, thinking of expanding their businesses or planning to start a business, what would these overall macro trends mean for people in 2024 as they are thinking of building their businesses or their professional careers over the next 20 years? Like, I mean, put another way, what does this mean for? Yeah.
What's the point? Yeah. Look, I guess at one level the point is we're in a place of rapid change. And so I guess as far as we're concerned from an investment standpoint, I guess it means that we should expect to see a lot of things continuously change. Now, the rate of change across categories, I guess, is debatable. And I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about sort of the types of risks that I think that you think about as you start to either build or think about the future. But at a high level, I would say that the thing to be aware of is how the market is evolving and what that means for the context of the thing you're doing today. And I think the thing you're doing today is going to change. I was at a talk last night on AI, and we were talking about generative AI. And the gentleman was saying that basically, look, the manner in which generative AI is coming in is going to significantly alter the way in which decisions get made in the future. And so when you start to put that into play and you say, whether it's a law firm or whether it's even my business, it will be assisted in some way by some system doing it. Now, that's going to take some time. In my opinion, India is slower in catching up on those things. And that's okay because the fundamental shifts in the market are enabling a lot of interesting opportunity. And so from our lens, what I look at is that means that we have the opportunity to create the brands now. And so, for example, the McDonald's of India is going to look very different than McDonald's did, although I appreciate there's McDonald's here today. But why would I go and build a real estate-driven business for that? If I could think about an IKEA that exists as well, does it have to be that, or can it be a rental model where you subscribe to furniture, as we've done in a business called Furlenco? So I think that there's a chance in the shifts, and I think that we saw this in, let's say, mobile connectivity. So we didn't have landline penetration, and so instead of landline penetration, we shifted directly to mobile. Perhaps the same thing will happen in terms of electric vehicles. So I think the idea is, if I had the map as to how this played out, I'd be very happy. But I think what I'm doing instead is saying, look, there are a lot of data points that we have to keep looking at and trying to figure out then where do these imply that things will shift going forward. Did that help?
But probably fair to say that, and I don't want to sound like, I'm reading it off a government propaganda thing, but But I mean, fair to say that like there hasn't been another time as golden as this, where you literally throw seeds into the soil and the chances of it being successful, or at least having a fighting chance of it being successful, is more than ever before?
I'm laughing just because I've been making pitches to investors since 2005 saying exactly that.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure how to answer that, but sure, yes, I'd like to believe that. I also have now, because I've had to say this so often, I said this time it's different.
Yes.
And unfortunately, this time it's different. Someone said that those are the 4 most dangerous words. And so but yes, I would say, look, and that's why we put all that data, and that's why I've put all that there to say, these are the reasons why, yes, now it seems like it's really happening. But I'll caveat it by saying that whatever we've expected to happen over every time and course of our businesses has never happened. And so as much as all this data suggests this, and I want to be optimistic about it, I mean, I am, because I'm investing in it as well, but I'm also realistic about the fact that we've generally missed something in the evolution of this. So yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so I guess the way we've thought about consumption has been 2 types of categories. And I think that what I've learned over the past 20 years or so of investing is that if you don't get this right, then you get a lot of things very wrong. And what I mean is, if you're a utility product, a bag of rice, there's very little you can do to differentiate the channel in which that's sold in. So the companies that sell a bag of rice at the cheapest price make money. The companies that try to sell it at a premium don't make money. And I think knowing whether you're a bag of rice or whether you're actually a piece of discretionary spending that has the ability to make money at different price point is what you have to kind of be cognizant of. So a street vendor can sell a t-shirt at 200 rupees and make money. Massimo Dutti can sell it at 5,000 rupees and make money. And that doesn't work in the bag of rice, that works in a t-shirt. And so therefore, understanding how that dynamic plays in whatever business you're in or whatever situation you're looking at is really important. The government's done a good job, and I think this is important to understand, because I think for the longest time, when I first came and started investing, we used to say whatever we're doing is sort of in spite of the government, not necessarily supported by it. And I would say that generally speaking, we tend to avoid regulated sectors and not be in those areas for that reason. But I think of late, and the importance of how do you govern this large a population, and how do you effectively ensure that you have information, and I think that whether it was the vaccines and how we were able to track stuff, my kids went and got their vaccine in the US for some reason, and so they got a card. I mean, here, it's connected to your entire digital identity, and so it's a very different system.
And has any one of you, I mean, maybe if you are so well traveled, has any one of you seen the vaccine card that is there in the US? It looks like a Russian card. It looks like a handwritten Russian card. It's like it's torn off a little cardboard thing. Like, if you drop coffee on it, forever it's gone, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But Sandeep, I want to add to it. For all the years that I ran a very regulated business, people would say, tell us what can the government do, and I would be like, just get out of our way, right? But you're absolutely right. This is the first time that I feel like, no, actually, what they're doing, at least in businesses I'm involved in, that number that that Sandeep pointed out, 74 airports till 2014 becomes 148. Guess what it's going to be in 2026? 225. This is one of the fastest airport build-outs in the world, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess we're in a again good space with that working as well. I think when you think about scale as well, that scale delivers some amazing opportunities. And I think Arvind has been one of those that's been there for years. And the fact that they do 2,000 surgeries a year, which is 13x the global average. Their cost per, I think that should be day actually. Their cost per cataract, that's the difference. $3,200 versus $120, and with a lower post-op complication rate. So, and as we think about healthcare, and there's many more slides that went behind this, which I've taken out for today because there are too many slides. But what this prompted in our thinking was that as we think about healthcare and the opportunities in healthcare, we can't lose these advantages, because I think the systems that have been created in other countries between and actually between insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, doctors, and there's about 10 people in between each of those that layer in cost in it that we don't have today because, unfortunately or fortunately, insurance is underpenetrated. Now, as you think about how insurance penetrates going forward, should it penetrate by that model, or what should it look like here, and how can it be? Because if it takes the Western model, cost goes up because incentives get messed up. So I think we're sitting in some really interesting places with this stuff, which is also attracting medical tourism, and those types of things are coming in. But the answer to how that moves forward and scales is a good question, and I think that's where opportunity exists. We have a good population, a young population, and for some reason we opted to put this in the context of countries. So under 14, we have one America. Between 15 and 16, we have two Americas. And over 60, we have two Mexicos. Again, I don't know why we picked Mexico, but I guess it was the number. And so, which is interesting because this is going to be really cool going forward in terms of what it can do. But this is going to be really challenging as well, and as this moves to this, even more challenging. And so we really have to figure out how to think about education before this demographic dividend becomes a demographic debt or a problem and chaos and all of that kind of stuff. And so, and unfortunately, the education system doesn't work. If you kind of look at how we look at businesses, we say, do you have product market fit? And I would argue that education does not have product market fit. Only 28% of the kids are graduating, so whatever the system is not working effectively. And that's the other really interesting thing I think about opportunities in India. The lack of incumbency really means that you can envision it from scratch. And so in the US, if you were to offer, let's say, remote education in some way, shape, or form, you'd be up against public school infrastructure, you'd be up against vested interests for the budget for that. Here, there's nothing. And so you have the chance to really reimagine what it can look like. Now, that being said, we've burnt our fingers a few times in education trying to build businesses, so it's not easy. So it's one of those things where, again, I think education and healthcare are essentially services that are public services that people are trying to make money in. And I think that that's good that you can try to make money, but it's hard because people view it as a public service. But there's another side of education, which is training, and I think workforce training. So if you look at this, 80% of the manufacturing workforce starts without formal training. And even if you sit in a classroom and do it, they say only 1 in 20 concepts are remembered. So as we look at manufacturing becoming more automated and more tools and machinery coming in there, you're going to have to train people. So again, these create opportunities to think about how that can be done. People have been our biggest and best export. I guess we all know the companies that a lot of the Indians run, but what was interesting is the median Indian family in the US earns 2 times the national average. Education-wise, we're 2x the national average there in terms of college graduates. This I found really interesting. I didn't realize that 27% of all nurses globally are Indian. So we are exporting nurses, which, again, that was surprising. So I think that this kind of stuff is clearly showing that there's a large services sector beyond the stuff that we normally think about as outsourcing, coming to outsourcing. We have 45% of the global capability centers in the world are based in India. And this has gone from simple back office tasks to actual AI, machine learning tasks. You look at Goldman, for example, they're building a lot of their tech infrastructure now out of India. So I think that in general, that skill set, and when you have global companies, and we'll talk about it in a second in the context of manufacturing, when you have global companies come, the spillover effect for local entrepreneurs to find talent that's been trained by them, right? They've done all the hard work. They've trained them in whatever the sector might be, is really interesting. I'm going to pause for a second. Is there anything I can kind of clarify so far in what I'm saying?
I wanted to understand from all the research, and I'm sure you've covered it in slides ahead, but which industry, if you could do an industry breakdown on market share, which is highest, most promising to least promising? From
a new opportunity perspective?
New opportunities, yes.
If I could add to that, like if you could just tell us a few businesses we could start, you'll invest in, we'll make a lot of money.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think it's, maybe I'll step back and say the way we look at stuff is I look at consumption, and that's all I care about. I don't care about B2B businesses. I'm not good at figuring out how to sell to a company. And so, yeah, so in B2C, so given that lens, I'm sure there are very large B2B opportunities that exist. And there are, by the way, there are great companies that are doing cool things in that area in terms of, there's Zetworks and Of Business that have done a great job of aggregating up the small manufacturers in India and providing a platform for global players to access them and for those small players to access global markets. And all of that is great, but I don't understand B2B sales, so it's not my world. On the consumption side, I guess the way I think about it is anything that people consume is how we would start to cut it. So I'll give you an example of a space that we didn't get into, and maybe that'll kind of put some context on how we think about it. The pet space. There's a lot of companies that have gone into the pet world. Pallavi knows, during the pandemic, I got a dog, and therefore I was very excited about the pet space. And we said, okay, and then Heads Up for Tails sprouted up everywhere, and so there must be something. And then Sequoia invested $35 million in Heads Up for Tails, so the pet market is here. So we looked at it, and the pet market's about $650 million today. And so, which is fine, and I'm gonna, in a couple of slides, talk about venture math. And when I talk about that, maybe I'll give some more context, but we didn't feel it was big enough. And so when you start to look at it, you have to look at a space and say, is it big enough for us to be wrong enough about where we are and maneuver to find the right part of it to build a big business? And so I don't have a list of, here's a list of them and how I would go down it. I would look at it more like, do I believe that it's got enough maneuverability for us to take the money we've put in and for that company to build to a revenue scale, being wrong about what they're saying today? So I know I'm not answering your question, and it's because I can't, because I don't have the answer. But generally, and maybe in a few more slides, I'll talk about the philosophy of how we think about spaces, and I think that might give a little bit more context. Okay. All right, I'm going to continue. So manufacturing is the other area. And as much as I'm a consumer business, I think it's really important to understand this, because we really suck in manufacturing. And we've been at our all-time low. And therefore, what this means, like any optimist, we have nowhere to go but up. And so I think that that's what's going to start happening. And it's going to happen not just because it's a nice idea, but because it's essential to fix the account deficit. If you look at it, we basically import more than we export. That's a problem. Now, if you have to fix this problem, simplistically put, electronics, machinery, and chemicals make up 210 billion of that. If you can stop buying it and start making it, that will help the equation. And so with that in mind, you've seen all these PLI schemes and all these ideas of helping companies do it. The biggest beneficiaries of it, honestly, are multinational companies coming in. But that's fine, because when they come in, they actually grow stuff. So if you look at it, and we've seen this again, I take some comfort in the fact that it's happened elsewhere, so therefore it should happen. India and Vietnam were at about $6 billion in electronics export value in 2009. By 2022, Vietnam has moved to 110 billion, India's at 16. Now, what happened? These companies all entered Vietnam in those years. Them entering, them setting up manufacturing, spurred more local companies to grow there, enabled more export out of the country. So if I look at what's happening now in India, Apple's making made-in-India phones for the world from India. Samsung's launched a facility here. Micron's launched here. So we're going to now start to see the large companies come in. And when they come in, when you see this, in China, Apple has 151 suppliers. That's resulted in 6 million jobs there. In India, they currently have 14 suppliers, which has only resulted in 150,000 jobs. As that number goes up, this number goes up. And I think that through manufacturing, you'll now start to see more and more job creation. And these are going to come from small companies that are going to realize that they are going to be able to make more money by being suppliers to Apple, getting trained on those things, and then figuring out that they can start their own thing. So this is a long journey. But I mean, it's a journey that we're now on. And I think that that's really encouraging. Finally, the last section in this part, the last part in this section at least, is just on environment. And I guess the point is, India's problem is the world's problem. And if you look at it, the agricultural sector employs 150 million people. It's 17% of GDP. When there was a rice issue in the world, in the US and Canada, they said only 1 bag of rice per family except basmati rice. And so this was the only rice that you were allowed to consume because we're supplying 40% of the world's rice. So when you start to realize, and then you see India's coastal line and the percentage of the country that's coast, and you start to understand the impact of that. So you realize we can't avoid this problem. And I've got a lot more slides in terms of sort of India's commitment to it, how we're doing, and actually we're doing quite well in spite of the world outside that we see. We are doing overall quite well in this. And so things like this are interesting to start to explore. So bamboo, for example, what can it do? How will it evolve? I mean, these are ideas that I think as we think about these problems and how to address it, hopefully some unique, interesting things come about here. So I was saying this earlier. I think when we look at investing, there are 4 risks that we look at: technology risk, market risk, business model risk, and team risk. Now, if you were in the US as a venture fund, you would say, I'm not taking market risk. The market's very evolved. I know how it works. Can I build a better mousetrap for the market that exists? And therefore, when you think about venture, what it does is, I'm going to put a little bit of money in something, and I'm going to see if this mousetrap works. And if that mousetrap works, then I'll give it some more money. And then if it starts to work even more, then I'll give it even more money. Now, that's fine because you believe the market's already there. In India, that's not the answer, in my opinion. I don't think we're taking technology risk. We're not at that level of technology evolution yet. It will get there over time. But what we have is a tremendous market that's changing. So what we're taking is market risk. And we're saying, do we believe that, let's say, a furniture rental model can work? I'm not taking risk on can you make furniture. I'm not taking risk on does subscription work. I'm taking risk on do I believe that people will subscribe to furniture. I'm taking a risk on will people take a bus. These are market risks. So I think that understanding that has really kind of framed how we've thought about the types of businesses we invest in. And so I mentioned earlier that we invest in a few companies. A typical venture model that invests at a very early stage says, I'll invest in 40 companies, one of these guys will figure it out. We invest in 8 companies per fund, which means that our failure rate has to be very low. And the reason I'm comfortable with that is I'm saying, look, I can understand what a view is on the market. So coming to your question earlier on spaces, I'm saying that, look, as long as I believe the market's big enough, we'll move here and there a little bit. Now, having said all of that, we've made tons of mistakes in spite of that, but at least I'm not taking the risk on will the technology work or not. Okay, I'm now finally going to talk about scaling, which was the topic. But before I do that, I'll stop again. Anything? Sure.
You mentioned you don't invest in technology, but what about consumer tech products like food tech, ed tech, real estate tech?
Yeah. So actually we do, sorry, I misspoke. We invest in places where technology helps the solution. What I'm not investing in is large language models for AI. We're not investing in thin film semiconductors that are going to revolutionize solar. What I'm saying is that I want technology to be a lever in how you address the consumer opportunity. So, and a way we try to quantify that is say, if there's an existing business in this space, what is this new opportunity doing to be better in some aspect of the financial statements? And how is technology playing a role in that? So I'll give you one example. We have a business called Rebel Foods. Rebel operates a bunch of cloud kitchens. So today we operate about 440 cloud kitchens. Each cloud kitchen runs about 8 brands. And so the thought process when we invested in it was an existing QSR business, like a McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, whatever, they have rent as a big part of their cost equation. If I can remove rent and run it on a cloud, effectively, back office, then people are just ordering. Now that was interesting for one brand, and that was our initial thesis. We can run one brand like this, and that's great. What we came to realize is that CapEx that we spend on building that kitchen allows us to put multiple brands in there, because today, when you walk into a McDonald's and they suddenly serve you, I don't know, fried rice, you're going to have a problem with it. Or if they serve you pizza, you're going to say, this makes no sense. But if I run a burger brand, a biryani brand, a pizza brand, a wraps brand out of one kitchen, and it's multiple brands on the front end on Swiggy for you, you could care less. And so our CapEx creates extreme leverage. So I don't have rental costs as an issue for each subsequent brand. Similarly, I don't have failure rates of these kitchens, because I don't have to keep opening them up and shutting them down. I can open up a new brand in an existing kitchen and then grow it up that way. So now where does tech play in all of this? What's really interesting is a QSR business on average wastes 8 to 10% of its cost of goods on just wastage. They get their demand wrong. In Rebel, our wastage is about 1%. That's because using tech, we've been able to predict what demand will look like and ensure that we're managing our inventory in those nodes in the right way. So that's the kind of way we think about tech. And so I'm saying we didn't invent tech for that. We just had to apply it in an interesting way.
Would that also apply for fashion from an inventory management perspective?
Yeah. So we've invested in a company called Bombay Shirt Company. And so, thank you. And we used to have some slides in here as well that talked about fast fashion and our problems with fast fashion. You look at it from a consumer perspective, I think there's an acknowledgement that there's wastage in the world and the terrible conditions, and there's enough backlash in general media about it. I think consumers are looking to stand out a little bit more, so there was that angle. And so there's a bunch of things that got us to start to think about fashion. And then as we looked at it, I came to start to look at it and say, look, I'm not able to understand if a brand is hot today, will it be hot in 7 years? And let's assume that for us as an investor, it needs to stay hot for 7 years, ideally beyond that, but I need to get out at a point in time when it's still growing and it's still good. And you start to meet enough people and say, well, we understand the customer. We understand what they're looking for. We know what it is. And I say, okay, that's great. I don't. And so I don't know if it'll work. And so instead what we did is, we said, can we think about how a system can work that creates some differentiation in the production process of a piece of apparel? So that's how we ended up in custom clothing. And we said, look, if I can remove inventory as a problem and say that, and Bombay Shirt Company, for example, holds no inventory. So their average revenue per square foot in a store is 3 times the industry average because you can just sell more without having to stock more. We have no wastage, so we have nothing that has to be sold at a discount or considered dead stock in any way, shape, or form. You have customers that tend to be more invested in their product because they spent time on it, the IKEA effect. They built it themselves. So that gave us some comfort that, look, we may get the brand wrong, but we have a system that works here. And again, here, lots of interesting mistakes we made along the way. Bombay Shirt Company, we then acquired a company called Cora. And we said, we can do this for jeans. And we said, jeans, and taking the Rebel model, we said, jeans is different from shirts, so it should have its own brand. And so we said, great, let's go do that. And so we started to roll out jeans under Cora, and we started to do it. And we realized that it just wasn't working for us, that the efficiency was there, but the leverage in brand clearly wasn't there because we were trying to build 2 different brands. Then we launched casual wear under a brand called City Of. And that again was challenging because you had to try to reacquire the same customer for a different category. So now what we've done is collapsed it all back into Bombay Shirt Company, which again is strange for a pair of pants to be made by a shirt company, but we'll figure that out. But that's how we've thought about it in fashion. And there's a lot of tech that runs in the back end that ensures that we're stocking correctly, ensures that our production turnaround times reduce. So yes, I think, and there'll probably be even more areas that we haven't thought about, but that's how we've applied it so far.
Hi, my name is Nidhi, and coming back to the manufacturing point. Now, I've had a business which was doing very well for 5 years, and then it failed miserably. And it was a luxury furniture, like wicker furniture, the poolside furniture. And for the first couple of years, it did very well. We were supplying to the hotels like Taj, Lemon Tree, Imperial, and then so one biggest problem is the labor, especially the factory was set up in Noida, you just cannot get past the labor laws, the fights, the very basic menial things that you have to deal with. Plus, it's a furniture thing. So, you're one customer, you're not getting back to them for the next 5 years. So you have to hunt for your pool every day, your new set of customers. That's problem number 2. And 3, with the influx of your importers like China and everybody coming in, it just kills your market. Like, we could not sustain unless we could have been, funded very well. We could not have a sustain on our own money. So how do you see this manufacturing? Because labor will always be an issue. The influx of China and those imports will always be an issue.
Wow, sounds like you've lived a tough journey. I guess, again, I don't have an immediate good answer for you. I guess my view on it would be these are all I guess, the optimistic view, opportunities in that sense, right? If you can solve labor, you have a differentiation. If you can figure out the price point at which it works, and I guess this is where, again, I would layer the idea of technology into it to say that if I could, and again, I know nothing about that markets per se, and I think that market's a really interesting one because this single purchase stuff is really hard, in my opinion, right? I think that there was a lot of fanfare about Casper as a mattress brand. And I just always wonder, but how many times do you buy a mattress? And no, we'll sell them everything else. It didn't work. You couldn't, right? So I think that, and again, people have made a big deal about customer lifetime value. And I think that that's real good and well on a piece of paper. It's like if you say you go to the casino and the odds are eventually that you'll do okay, the odds are fine but you'll be dead at some point, right? And so I think that picking categories where the frequency of purchase works better, picking solutions that can actually leverage technology to ensure that you're creating an efficiency that works. And there's no reason why. Look, what is China's advantage? They've done it at scale. I think that we should get to that scale. And if you can get to that scale, and that's kind of what's going to get unlocked, I hope, as a result of other manufacturing coming. So if Apple comes and starts, and just take that as an example, if they come and they start saying, I'm going to make 25% of the phones in India, some guy is going to be sitting on a lot of scale of production of some transistor. Now, his cost of that transistor is going to drop significantly. He's going to supply to some other person who's going to say, I want to build a clock that uses that transistor. Now, the cost comes down. So I think it's a journey, and it's not going to be an answer that's going to help today, but I think that this stuff is going to start, if you start looking at who's kind of being built and who's scaling, those inputs are going to lead you to what outputs and products that we can build. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, Sandeep. Yeah. Hi. I am building a medtech company. It reads blood and urine reports, analyzes them, and stores them in a blockchain. So the three models: basic OCR, then AI-enabled analysis, and then the storage in the blockchain. So I have two questions here. One is, given the market which is disrupted, and there are apps like Zomato, Uber, who have disrupted the industry, do you see this application in that sector as a disruptive idea for medical sector? And the second is, in your previous slide, which was market and technology, I feel it lies in both the sectors where technology is also important and the market is also necessary to maneuver it and find the right application that will be used and liked by consumers.
Sure. So I've looked at electronic medical records on and off over the years at different points in time. And I'd say the challenge I faced in that space has been, there's let's say a doctor, a diagnostic lab, a pharmacy, and a patient. Somebody has to be incentivized to get the information into the system. And in the US, what happened was it was a government bill that gave a ton of money to people to make that happen. And it didn't happen very well, as most government initiatives are, and so therefore it didn't work. And so, and you can observe it in India today. Everybody that goes to the doctor is carrying that plastic bag with all their information. It seems stupid. Now, maybe you kind of evolve and say, okay, I will enter it into notes and I'll have it on my thing and I'll show up. But I think that there is an opportunity for this. I don't know what the answer is. And so I guess as a starting point, yes, I do believe there's a pain point. I do believe it's there. I don't know who has the right incentive to start to make that shift. I think putting it on a blockchain makes some sense because this is the kind of information. Usually the problem with blockchain stuff is it's like, the answer is blockchain, now what's the problem? And that's how it starts. This doesn't seem like that, so I can appreciate the rationale for putting it there. But I think I would want to understand how the incentive structure works to get the information in the system. And I guess your second point was around technology and market risk, right? Absolutely. I mean, you're using technology, and that's a good example of you're not inventing the blockchain, you're simply using it. So I do agree that, and that's very interesting to say that it's a tech-enabled solution, so I believe that there's something interesting, at least from our lens, that exists there, and the market's there, so, yeah. Yeah, I do have more slides, yeah. The actual topic, right?
So I wanted to ask you about a couple of things, really. Given the example about your Bombay shirt company, the denim model that you added, vis-a-vis the kitchen model, you know, there's a new theme called Learn Fast, Fail Fast. I'm
sure we have that here as well.
Ah, okay. So you're going to cover that later.
No, not at all.
So, and you also spoke about, sorry, I'm clubbing a whole lot of things. Just wanted to ask it in one go. And then the other thing that you mentioned is that, the cost of wastage you can reduce by implementing technology. What is the cost of technology there? How do you weigh the cost of technology that comes in vis-a-vis the cost that you're kind of saving up on wastage or any other things that you may look at? So that is one question, and the other is exactly this, the fail fast model in terms of learn quickly, try quickly, try at a very cheap price, and then fail fast and move forward, which is what I believe you were doing at both your, the clothing company as well as the kitchen company. So, I just wanted to understand your views on both these aspects.
Sure. I think you brought up a really good point that I'm contending with nowadays in most of our companies. There's a significant cost to this idea of technology that is going to be differentiating in some way, shape, or form. And the market in general has been willing to give people a lot of rope to go ahead and do that for a while. So it's kind of over the last, call it 10 years, there's been this idea that you're a tech company, great. But if you're just an apparel company, no. Right? So therefore, or if you're a food company that's using tech, fantastic. So what did these companies do? They built a ton of overhead. And in my opinion, what I'm doing right now is we're working with everyone to reduce all that overhead because there's a massive cost to it. So to put context on it, a business like Rebel is now doing $200 million in revenue and still losing money. Okay? At the same scale, Domino's, when they were doing $200 million in revenue, was doing about 5% EBITDA margins. So now you have this conversation and say, why are you losing money? The model's fantastic. You've done all these great things. Why? Because we've got this overhead that we've built lasting for 10,000 kitchens. Okay, but why? Right? Because it doesn't work if you build it for just 200. So we need all these people. So you have to get to scale faster. And so this is the game, the imperfect game that exists here, that you're saying, I'm building a business that's going to ensure that we can scale in a certain way. And so why is tech investing interesting? Historically, if you go back to the late 90s and tech as the internet kind of came about, the idea was if I build the platform once, whether I run 1 transaction, 10 transactions, or 100,000 transactions, my incremental cost is negligible. So that was the logic. So I'll build a tech platform, I can book 1 travel ticket, I can book 100 travel tickets. I don't need to keep hiring people to do this. Right? So that was the logic. So that same logic got applied to, let's say, the food business. I'm going to build a system that ensures that we can effectively run 10 kitchens, 400 kitchens, 4,000 kitchens. But there's a lot of cost there. So the answer to your question or statement is, yes, it's a problem. And yes, we've got to solve it. And the answer typically is, it will be solved with scale. That those "its time is different" scary words, we'll solve it with scale, the second set of scary words. But people fund it. Right? And that's the journey you go on. And out of that does come some businesses that make it through, but it is really difficult to play that game. And it's a game. And so that's the truth of it. Fail fast, learn fast? Absolutely. I mean, there's so much stuff around good is better than great, all this kind of stuff. But generally speaking, for these types of businesses, I think that if you can get your customer experience to a point where you believe it is solving a majority of the issues, getting out there and getting feedback sooner rather than later is more valuable than perfecting it. Not at the expense of ensuring a quality customer experience. So there again, there's the balance. So there's no steadfast rule for this, but I would say if you put out a bad product, you're obviously going to get bad experience. But if you wait forever, you're never going to get feedback. So there's a concept called dog fooding, which comes from the idea of eat the dog food to know how it tastes. So, and I'll talk about that in a second as well. But this idea that you have to get it out there, otherwise it won't be worth anything. So should I actually talk about the topic? Okay. Oh. Did I do something? Okay, so as and again, it was really helpful for me to do this because I was reflecting on where we see problems within scaling. And actually, Aditya and I have been talking a lot about this in the last couple of weeks. Culture. Culture, capital, and customer. And I kind of want to leave these as the main thoughts. Okay, great. This is working. Okay, so culture, capital, and customer. And these are the areas I would think about as businesses scale because these are the things that I think tend to break a lot or tend to have the issues. So I think to start with on the culture side, I think you have to define the culture and really protect it. What I mean is, when you start a business, you're one person with an idea. Maybe you're two people. You kind of spend a lot of time with each other, you vibe, you get it, you know what you're talking about, you're clear on how you want to go. The minute you bring that third person in, that third person came in to do a task, you have 4 tasks to do, you're not spending as much time, the culture starts to shift. The fourth person comes, it's even diluted. And I'm telling you from experience, we lived through this. InMobi is a mobile ad business that we'd invest in. We invested at Series A. The company had not 4, but maybe 14 people. It was very tight. They were working out of what I want to say is a paper mill, but it wasn't really a paper mill. There was a paper mill downstairs that made a lot of noise, and they were upstairs, and you could see the environment was just probably this size, and there were 10 people sitting there. There's no way you didn't know what the culture was as an individual there. Then we put money in the business. They moved into a real office. Things started to evolve. They started to get 40 people. They managed it. They maintained it. They were aligned. They knew what they were doing. Then for a long time, we found it hard to raise money. And one fine day, we raised $200 million. And things changed overnight. Suddenly, the floodgate opened in terms of hiring. You were hiring engineers left, right, and center. Within 12 months, we were at 400 employees. And these are not front-end retail staff employees. These are people building products, people selling things to advertisers, people that really need to know what we stood for as an organization. Everything broke. We burnt money, we hired too quickly. Everything had to be slowed down, and literally from that 200 million, I think we had at the end maybe 75 before they course corrected. And that's the expensive lesson that we went through that I would highly encourage people to say, you have to ensure that you know what your culture is first, because I don't think a lot of time is spent necessarily thinking about it. You just feel it. But I think whatever you feel has to in some way be translated into something that can be communicated to everybody else so that you don't go through this problem. Because the day you get that money and have that ability to scale up, the whole world changes. And it changes at a pace that, and again, I'll come to it in a second, it changes at a pace that you can't control because you are literally on a treadmill at that point. So this is the first thing I would keep in mind. The second is, pretty simple. Never run out of money. It seems obvious, but again, once you get going with the business, especially if you're venture funded. And I'll tell you, my experiences with friends who run their own business, who don't raise money outside, is they have much more value for money. And they know that statement much better. So, we talked a little bit about Rebel before. Here again, and I was going to talk about this, drive your efficiencies with technology, but there, I think we've overinvested to an extent, and we've had to recalibrate how that technology is working and what it's doing for us. What they did really well was they raised money early. So they entered the pandemic having closed a very large round of funding, so they had the ability to sit back and wait. One of the things that we're talking to a lot of our founders about nowadays is when you get money, assume half of it is not going to be used. And just don't, because something bad is going to happen. And more likely than not, things happen bad faster than you can expect. And so if you budget accordingly and have raised that capital accordingly, I think you'll be in a safer place. Since I'm a venture fund and a lot of people tend to want to talk to us about venture raising money from us, I think you have to really ask the question of, is it right for you or not? And this is the somewhat complicated venture math I was going to do earlier. And so let's say you want to raise $5 million. And so you want $5 million, and let's assume for argument's sake you're ready to give up 30% of your company. The person giving $5 million conservatively wants a 3 times return on their money. So they want $15 million at some point in time. Now, great. And by the way, these numbers can change here and there, but it gives you an order of magnitude. Now, fast forward. You build your business, that guy's 30% stake at some point gets reduced to about 10%. So now you're saying, okay, I have to give him $15 million back, so I need a business that's worth $150 million. Now, let's assume you're in an industry where the revenue multiple is 3 times revenue. That means you have to build a business that's $50 million in scale. I think understanding this math for whatever business you're in is really important before you raise money, whether that's from angel investors or institutional investors, because now, once you get on this journey, somebody's on your neck looking at this number regularly and saying, why aren't we growing? We get growth, and we'll come to growth in a second. Growth should be at a measured rate that's logical for your business, not driven by some crazy investor who's chasing some return. And so this is the equation that I think gets lost in the headlines of so-and-so raised $20 million, so-and-so raised $50 million. It's irrelevant. I mean, unless this works, and unless your business supports this in a time frame that makes sense, then the whole system is going to be strained for that entire journey. And you're going to spend 7 years not building a business, but raising money to try to achieve this, to try to make the next person happy. And that's the reality of it. Now,
Sandeep, I'll just pause you there. This is a very, very important slide. Would someone like to kind of go a little bit slower on this? Yeah, okay. So, Sandeep, I'll ask you the questions, and so Sandeep, okay, I'm going to try to Sandeep is the engineer, Silicon Valley guy. I did history honors in Delhi University, so
I used some pictures in the background. There's a treadmill.
Yeah, you should use the treadmill. So what's happening over there is that you think you're in that black box over there. You think you need $5 million to grow, okay? And that $5 million can come, I mean, I'm not joking, your $5 million could come from family members. You could go borrow it from your parents if they have money, or friends and family or something. You could go borrow it from a bank. You could go borrow it from private lenders, or you could come to a venture capital fund and ask for that $5 million. The venture capital fund has probably taken, let's say $100 million. They've taken $100 million from someone else, right? It's not like Sandeep has taken out $100 million and put it there. Those people are called LPs. They're called limited, they're LPs, they've given the money to the fund. So Sandeep has promised those LPs that if you gave me $100 million, in this example, at some point of time, I will give you $300 million. So therefore, the $5 million that they're putting in, they're therefore expecting that to grow 3x as well. Okay. So that's where that piece comes in, that now, as Sandeep was saying, the conservative estimate is 2.8x, 3x or something, but most people want to make 4x, 5x, that kind of stuff. Now, so therefore, in this example, this $5 million has to generate $15 million, 3x, at some point of time. Typically, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years type of a thing, right? And for those $5 million, you're saying, take away 30% of my company. Yeah? Okay. Let's make it a little bit simpler. Let's say it is 25% of the company, right? So $5 million, 25% is worth $5 million. Your business is valued at $20 million, 5 into 4. This is where Sandeep and I often, tragically find the tragic humor in newspapers today. People think that's success. My business is valued at $20 million. I have raised $5 million. The tragedy in this is raising money is not success. Please remember, one has to return it also, right? So it's very easy to get seduced into thinking I've become success because my business in fiction has been, valued at $20 million. All right. Business is growing, but you now need more money, I mean, most businesses will need more money at some point of time. So new people came in, your stake became smaller. That is what is meant by saying you diluted by 10%. Okay. So if in that example, if you had 25%, 10% is gone. Now you have 22.5% left or whatever, or like,
And this one I said you've ended up at 10%.
yeah, so you've taken money. You've actually come down to 10%, which is, by the way, perfectly normal. I mean, let's say when Sanjeev Bikhchandani put in an initial amount of money in Zomato years and years ago, what he finally ended up with was much less, which is perfectly okay, because it's, let's say you own 25% of 100 rupees versus you own 10% of 10,000 rupees. It's all right. You made more money. Now here comes the slightly hairy part only. That a lot of times businesses get valued at a multiple of revenue. Different industries, different businesses have different multiples, right? So in this case, Sandeep has taken an example, whatever business this might be, generally it is being valued at 3x of revenue. Airline business is different, garments business is different, some tech business will be different, restaurant business will be different. Let's say in this case this. So now for that 10%, right, for that $5 million to become $15 million, right, where you only own 10% anymore anyway, so the whole business has to be $150 million. That's when the 10% will be worth $15 million. And if it's just a multiple of revenue, to get to 150 divided by 3, $50 million, right? $50 million, right? So originally, when this business was valued at, let's say, $15 million or so, right, 3x of revenue, if that was the same thing, that the same math held there, you had a revenue of $5 million. You had a revenue of $5 million into $15 million. Right? That 5 has to move to 50 in a matter of 7 years. Right? So you have to grow it 10 times to deliver 3x the money. Right? So that's what Sandeep is saying, that when you're thinking about going and raising venture capital, first things first is not to say, किसी भी तरह के ना मैं तो कर दूंगा, like I'll grow this company 10x. You have to first see whether the company can grow 10x or not. If it can't, then that's the first reality check. Sorry, I just paused it there, Sandeep.
Yeah, no, great. Okay, thank you. Helped. Anything on this? Sir. Yeah. Okay, sure. Okay. Okay. So, and I guess when I was just looking at the models and the markets and the businesses that we invest in, everyone's kind of shooting for, I'm going to be the next Facebook, I'm going to be the next Google, or I'm going to be the next Tesla. And I think to put it in context, in India, only 1% of the total listed companies have a value over 10 billion. So, look at the median value at IPO is 500 million. The average value of an M&A deal is 60 million. So as an investor who looks at this space, when somebody comes and says, listen, I'm going to build a $5 billion company, the likelihood is very low. I hope, we wish, but the practicality is we're probably playing for between a 60 million and a $2 billion business. That's how we have to end up thinking about the world. Aditya mentioned debt, and I was just smiling because I've been dealing with a lot of debt problems in a lot of our companies. And I found this quote really interesting. One of the greatest disservices you can do a man is to lend him money that he can't pay back. And so I think it's on both sides. You go borrowing money, that's a challenge if you don't know whether you can pay it back or not. Similarly, the person lending you money is in that world. And today we have an ecosystem of venture debt that's available, and all of these things are there, and it's all good and well when times are good, but when it gets bad, it gets really bad. And so just a thought to keep in mind in terms of what kind of money is right for your business at what point in time. I think you have to talk about, is this the right time to scale? There's this statement, growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. I don't think we want to be a cancer cell. And I think that I've lived through this. There's been a lot in the media about Dunzo. And to give you the short version of it, I think we scaled that business too quickly. We hadn't found the model that was right. We were a quick commerce business, excuse me, a quick commerce business that was picking up product from small kirana shops and delivering it to people. Tremendous customer love, had grown in Bangalore in a very great environment and had really solved a need for people. Then, again, money came. Money came meant, okay, we're going to create dark stores. And these dark stores are going to make us more efficient. But okay, fine. Do we know how it works? Not yet. But let's put 80 of them. That was the problem. When you have 80 of them doing the wrong thing and trying to change that becomes very difficult, and doing all of that in the backdrop of scaling is a really big mistake and challenge. So I think you have to think about, do I have the model right? Is now the right time to scale? I told you. So actually this was a conversation we'd had with the guys at Lenscar. Every year we shut 10% of non-performing stores. No debate or discussion on whether we should give it more time. Shut first and do a post-mortem later. I thought that was interesting. I mean, I don't know that's necessarily the right answer all the time, but I do think that it's a clarity of thought in terms of how you're going to decide to move your business. I was talking about Rebel earlier. In play, we shut 5% of the non-performing stores. Company EBITDA went from 455,000 to 635,000. Revenue dropped marginally, and you can see the kitchen count went from 367 to 350. So we shut that many kitchens, but overall the business improved. I think this thought process of, look, let it go. Let the things that aren't working be done and stop and move on has to be in play. Protect the customer experience. I think that when we start a business, you start with this idea that I really know what the customer wants. I want to deliver something to them that is going to be phenomenal. Then as you go, and especially as you get larger, raise money, you start to lose that a lot. And we had this debate at ClearTrip early on. When we started, Rush was one of our co-founders, was very clear. We're not putting an ad on the homepage. It didn't work. And airlines used to come and say, we need homepage advertising. And he said, we're not doing it. And he was like, look, how much are we going to make? And then you saw other sites with a toothpaste ad. And he's like, well, how much money are we making from that? Instead, let's really protect the customer experience. I think he would have a fit if he saw this today, by the way. The fact that there's a guy in the corner, Dhoni, I think, kind of that, just very clear. You know, we want to have a clear customer. And I think for anybody that used ClearTrip over the years, I think that's what stood out with it. And I think that the minute you lose track of that, and today ClearTrip is owned by Flipkart, and there's a different machine running it, and there's a whole different system. And I do think that over time, that's going to be a challenge for that business if they keep moving in this direction. So I think knowing what you're standing for the customer and having a voice that protects it as you scale is really important. Last few slides. Okay. So product market fit is a constantly evolving journey. And I think that we've seen this, whether it's been Melora in our portfolio, Bombay Shirt Company. We started by saying, let's be online. Okay, no, we're offline. Now, I think you have to keep figuring out what's going to work. So I don't think it is, I've achieved product market fit. It's not a destination, it's a journey. I think thinking about real business metrics as you scale is important. Vanity metrics come in a lot. What is your, I mean, we have like I told you, game streaming app. Our daily active users, monthly active users. Who cares? Does it generate revenue? And I think that understanding, I'm fine with it being an enabler to an end solution, but let's understand it from that lens. Don't get caught up with it, because I think funds as well will get very excited by some of these things and give you false sense of security that the business is being built correctly. I think you really want to think about cash flow. How does that work, and is it working or not? I like this quote as well. Profit, because there's often this question, profit or growth, profit or growth. Profit is not the explanation, cause, or rationale of business behavior and business decision, but the test of their validity. It is what matters. It is not a question of, is it an option? I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, if you don't have profit, you don't have a business. I think listening to the customer regularly is important. Sorry. Speak to customers, use your product. I think, again, as the business grows, you tend to lose track of this. There was a great example of At Amazon, I think they forced every executive to be to work in the call center for a period of time. I don't know if it still goes on or not, but I think that that's a really important fact that you have to stay aligned with it, which is also why I like consumer businesses, because you can use a product. And finally, I think this idea of engaging and asking people is really important. That's why I really like events like this. Honestly, I wish I had more time to learn the other way, but it gives at least a chance to share some of our learnings. And so I think they're domain experts and advisors, entrepreneurs, and yes, even investors have a perspective to offer. That's it.
Yes, thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes for questions, so we'll do a couple. We'll start over there.
Hi, Sandeep. Thanks. That was amazing. How many of the investments you've made are in companies that weren't profitable when you came in?
100%.
So how does that explain the logic of what? Is it just that you had a vision of how to make it profitable?
But listen, I think that that's our role in life. So, okay, again, we'll talk about the place that venture capital comes in the equation. If you're an entrepreneur, Aditya was mentioning different sources of capital. Either you're independently wealthy and you can put your money in. Maybe you have friends and family that are willing to give you the money to get going. Maybe there's a bank that will lend you the money. And typically a bank will lend you the money if you're an asset-heavy business. And so there's some collateral against it. So assume you're none of those. And then you're saying, look, I really want to build this and I want to get going. That's kind of, we're the last source at that point in time. You're coming in saying, hey, I think it would be, I want to build this idea, I think it's really interesting, and we're the kind of person that says, okay, we want to come along that journey with you, and we're willing to take the equity risk with you, right? So we have no collateral, we have no hope of recouping that money, no guarantee of recouping that money, and so therefore we're coming into that journey with the expectation that we're going to help build it together with you. Now, in that context, you can come in very early when it's an idea, you can come in when there's some basic product built, you can come in when there's some basic customer validation, or you can come in when it's scaling up. We tend to come in somewhere in that second zone, where there's some product built and there's some customer validation. If it's a pure idea, there's a bunch of other guys that do that, and they're doing it for those reasons. But I think in general what ends up happening is, these are not businesses that are making money yet at all, but our expectation is that with our capital, we'll improve these things and get it there. In all honesty, the problem of the last 10 years has been too much money has come in on top of all that and allowed people to continue to burn money for too long. And so that's what's getting course corrected now.
Hi, Sandeep. This is Alex.
Hi.
So when you take a decision to invest in a company, so what are the characteristics or the behaviors you look into and you decide yes or a no? So what will be the top 3 behaviors? So how do you decide, Frank?
So look, there are quantitative aspects that are pretty clear. Is it a large market? Is there a business model in the future that could work? And by the way, I would say the projections are somewhat irrelevant. What's interesting to understand are the cost drivers and the revenue drivers. So how well can I believe that your expectation on let's say margin will change the way you think it will? Or your expectation on customer acquisition costs will evolve the way it does. But those are, let's say, quantitative stuff, and there's a bunch that we can put in a box there. I would tell you from my perspective, the thing that I try to understand the best is their tenacity. Because, I'm continuously searching for a better way to figure this out, but the only way I've found now is to keep talking, and hoping that somewhere in there, a bit of a glimpse comes into how will you respond when things don't work? Because, like I said, invariably, nothing goes per plan. And so I think that understanding that, and there's a second more subjective aspect that we look at is, what is our ability to be influential in this? I'm not saying that we're right, but everything that we've just gone through, we have so many more slides and ideas around things that we've made mistakes on. Are you willing to listen? And will that play a factor in how you make a decision? Because at the end of the day, once we've invested, it's kind of done. It's your money. So now I'm stuck. All I can hope for is that you will take inputs in the best way possible. And so in that context, we try to say, look, will you do that? And can we have a healthy relationship with that?
Hi, I have a fashion label, okay, and I just wanted to ask, so if an investor does approach me, okay, and is willing to invest in my company, on what basis did they decide the percentage? Like you said, a 25% or a 35%, and what is a fair price to agree upon? And how do you repay that money? Is it done on a yearly basis or after 6 years, 7 years?
Sure.
Sorry, I have one more question. Or does the investor expect you to sell the company and then take a percent off that? I'm a little confused with this. I know it's a very random question.
No,
but
not at all.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's break the world into two types of capital you can raise: debt and equity. So debt, if somebody comes and says, I'm going to lend you money, they're very clear. You pay an interest rate, and at the end of it, you pay it back. Either an interest rate plus a payment at the end, or some sort of an EMI along the way, right? So that's the world of debt. Most debt people are hesitant, I would say, to invest in early stage companies because there's no collateral, right? So let's assume we're not talking about the world that functions that way. So now we're talking about equity. On the equity side, what would happen is you would have a conversation with someone and they'd say, listen, I really like your business. I think that if I gave you $1 million, you could grow it much faster. You would say, if I had $1 million, I could grow it much faster. I'd say, great, fantastic. Now, for giving you that $1 million, I have no idea whether you'll give me any money back later. So I'm taking some risk. So now the question becomes, how much risk am I taking? Now, if I think that, let's say your business is already doing $20 million in revenue. My $1 million, your $20 million, it's not that much risk, right? So it's probably reasonable that I'm not going to get a large percentage of your company. But let's say you're doing $10,000 in revenue. Now my $1 million is significant in relation. So now we have this conversation about how significant is it? Because there's two sides to this. One is you're the entrepreneur. You decide to do this because you don't want to work for someone and you believe you have a vision that you want to create. Now, if I come in and say, I want 90% of the company, you say, now I'm an employee to you. I don't want to be that. And I know that as well. So now this is a more of an art than a science. So there's this kind of back and forth. Okay, it's like a fish market, right? And it's terrible, but that's realistically what it is. Now you'll come up with a view that says, look, that company gave only 10% of its equity for this. And everyone's now seen Shark Tank. So they say, hey, look, that's what they said there, right? And so then I'll say, yes, but this company gave 30% here. You say, okay, but that other one did 15%. This is how it'll go. So it's not a perfect science, and it will be an iterative discussion based on ways in which you can explain your business and the relative risk associated with it. And it comes as well to that slide I had earlier. The earlier the stage of the business, the higher my expectation of the multiple that I need on my money, because it's the risk I'm taking. So if I invest in, I don't know, Tata as a public company, my expectation of what that return is going to be is much lower than if I invest in a startup, because I'm saying this could fail tomorrow. So I need to be compensated for that. And the only way I can be compensated for that is to take a certain percentage. Now, how do we find the return at the end? At some point, you're going to say, listen, I built this business to a size that now that big company is going to buy it, and then when they buy it, your share will be paid out at that point. But who knows what that will be? And so this is the journey that we're all on together, and we all now have to figure out what that means. And which is why, if you raise money, my advice or opinion would be that get it with someone who's very aligned with your vision. Your vision, your timeline is much more important than the money. I would give up more equity, take less money, for the person that you think is more clearly aligned with the way in which you want to build your business, the timeline in which you want to build your business, and the manner in which you want to think about exiting, if ever, in the future. Sure.
Hi, Sandeep. I have a slightly different question. I'm a policypreneur, and so maybe a question for you. Let's take CityFlow, for example. And one is the business itself, and then there is an enabling ecosystem. So, for example, if parking prices in Bombay, parking fees, on-street parking and all, substantially increased, there could be, this enabling ecosystem might also make consumers think about other options which CityFlow here is there to provide, for example. What do you think in your world is the role of this enabling ecosystem, for example, right? Just want to hear your thoughts on that, because this to me, scaling also depends on the enabling ecosystem.
Yeah. I'm really scared of the government. So the short answer is I would like someone to enable it, but I'm definitely not the person to take the lead on that. And I think you're absolutely right. Parking prices going up would help a lot. But honestly, the unfortunate reality is I think for people like me in the position and the things that we're doing, it's just we've not found the right method in which to actually engage. So there are lobbying associations, there's IAMAI, there's IVCA, there's these different groups that do different things, and I'm very happy that they exist. But I've opted instead to say, I'll live with the system the way it is, let me figure out if we can build a model. I would hope that the kinds of businesses that we're investing in move policy in a direction that kind of favors them. I'll give you one example. The ban of single-use plastic. It affected us a lot at Rebel initially. Packaging food, sending it out. I think it was a mistake on our part not to have done that to begin with. And so some of these things, as policies come about, I think in general are going to play to the favor of the non-incumbent. And because I'm hoping that we're thinking about where the consumer is moving in that direction already. They will accelerate, ideally, the change, and somebody should play a role in that. And perhaps it's something we need to think more about. Honestly, I haven't found the right manner in which to do that.
I'll just add something to this. This is more in the context of when some of you may be in regulated businesses, or where there is so just out of experience, having worked in regulated business for a long time, it's very tempting to say, this rule is going to change, and if I'm there at the right time, suddenly I'll make a lot of money. I'll give you a very simple example that some of you may, so for example, if in a city you have land, you're in the business of making buildings, and let's say that today the rule is you can go up to only 3rd floor. Tomorrow, if you have a general sense that that rule might change and they can allow a 4th floor also, suddenly you got 1 floor for free. Very tempting to do that. So that could be one place where you suddenly are opportunistic. Government, let's say, is going to open up new licenses in this, and then you put it in. On the other hand, the big fair warning that I'd like to give is, if there is something that is that can be changed again tomorrow, like you have a 5-year tax break, some new government comes and says, sorry, it won't be 5 years anymore, now it'll be just 3 years. You're dead, right? In the airline business, people would ask me all the time, what do you think about these new RCS routes, Udan routes, flying to small cities, etc. And I'm like, tomorrow some new government official comes and it says, great idea, Aditya, but today, new government, I'm now going to change it. You cannot build a business based on a stroke of a pen, type of a thing. But so that's one way of kind of looking at, regulatory or policy framework and things like that.
Can we take a last question, please?
Yeah. Maybe Achal has a question. Maybe you have one. Yeah.
Sure. Should I go ahead? Yeah. Hi, Sandeep. There are two different opinions I've been hearing about VC funds. One is just take the money. Just take the money, don't care anything about, the VCs care only about money and their returns. And the other is, which you mentioned, which is very rarely heard of, that they should align with your vision, with your values. So could you share some light on it?
It's like one of those things where you'll be happy for the first day, and it's a 10-year journey. Your life is going to be miserable if you're not aligned. So I don't think that there's any doubt in my mind. You take money from a person who doesn't align with your vision, like I said, something is not going to work along the way, and you're going to be stuck with this person. There's no getting them out, right? They're there. Once they're there, they're there. And so you said, I want to build a business at this pace, I want to do a certain set of things, I will get there at this point in time. This person come in saying, okay, but let's do it faster. And you're saying, no, but I want to do it this way. But let's do it faster. And you say, okay, fine, I'll take your money. Now, what's going to happen? For the first year, you're fine. after year 1, year 2, this person's calling you every day, saying you need to raise money, exercising some right that might exist. So I don't think that there's any doubt in my mind. You have to find, and not even the firm, you have to find the individual who you think aligns with and you can work with. Because you're stuck with that person for 7 years.
Whether it's venture capital or you're doing a listed company and you're always aligned with investors who believe in you. I mean, please never make the mistake of taking money from somebody with whom your values and your vision does not align. I mean, it'll be, dying every day 1,000 times, trying to deal with
100%. Yeah.
We can do one last question, please.
Yeah. There is this term often used, leap of faith. And the example that Aditya gave, FSI going up from 3 to 4. So how important is this leap of faith? And when should you exercise it?
Okay, so I'm going to say that, let's start with the fact that I believe that all entrepreneurs are crazy. I believe that all investors investing in early stage businesses are crazy. So leap of faith is kind of already there. And I mean it in the best way possible, because if you're starting something, you're looking at a situation that currently exists and saying, I don't believe it's working well, I believe I can do it better. And there's a bunch of people doing it a certain way. And yet you're sitting there saying, I think that I can do it differently, and I think that there's an opportunity for me to do so. Now, crazy is perhaps an extreme way of saying it, but there is definitely, you have a willingness to endure a certain amount of pain to make that a reality that does put you in a category where you've already taken a leap of faith. So if you've started down this journey, you've already done that. And again, I'm putting myself in that same bucket because I'm saying I look for people like that, and we spend our time generally with people like that. So we must also be crazy. So I don't know that there's any escaping that idea. You've started with it. Now the question becomes, how many more leaps of faith? Right? Now, and I think at some point rationality has to set in. And I think that that's where the balance comes between, I'm changing the world, and I'll give you a good example. FTX and this whole crypto world, right? I recently read the Michael Lewis book on it. And anybody who's seen an interview of Sam, the founder there, and looks at it, you realize there's something strange. But that quirkiness was what was most interesting about him. And you read the book and the history around it and the whole thing, they found that here's this guy walking around in cargo shorts and a t-shirt with disheveled hair and basically playing video games while he's doing interviews, but talking about stuff that's really out there and interesting. At some point that has to align with process, structure, order, right? So I think that I'm all for crazy, but it has to be balanced in some way. And so I'm all for these leaps of faith, but they have to be based on some sense of reality and some structure that will deliver what we talked about before, profits at some point.
Thank you. If we could please give Sandeep a round of applause. It's been so interesting. And Sandeep, we have something for you.
Thank you. Of course.